webinar series from the Washington Alliance for Quality Recovery Residences, and we are, I don't know, Justin, 4 or 5 in at this point, something like that. We started them back in the fall, early fall or summer, and we're just plugging along. And this one is will be interesting. We'll see how long we go. I'm not sure we'll go the full distance today because this is a topic we thought up along the way. Nobody suggested it to us, but we thought it would be interesting to discuss this idea of what makes a recovery residence. And it's interesting, I had a phone call earlier in the week from somebody who said, hey, there's this group house on my block, and they're doing some weird stuff, and I want to know if you guys could go and basically fix them and get them to sort of, you know, act more normal or whatever. And so it turns out, of course, that we couldn't track down the owner's contact information, and it turns out it probably wasn't a recovery residence at all. It was a different kind of house. And so so it was kind of a timely reminder to me that, you know, just because something is a group home, just because a home has somebody living in it that that might have a substance use disorder or might be in recovery, that doesn't mean necessarily that that's kind of the flavor of the home. And so I think as I've talked to operators and providers of all kinds of different facilities, this question comes up sometimes. It's like, well, are you running a recovery residence, or is your mission maybe more broad, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Not everyone has to fit into our particular category. But thought it would be good to just spend some time talking about what it is that makes a recovery residence. So we're gonna, before we get started, I wanted to see if, Justin, you're able to see if you can unmute, just as a test. Is there, we talked about this a couple minutes ago, is there a way to let folks chime in? I'm gonna ask a question here in a couple minutes, and I wondered if that's possible.
Yeah, it looks like right on the participant list, you have the ability to allow to talk.
Great.
So if people want to raise their hand, we should be able to.
Great. Well, I will cue you when we're up for that part, because I really want some feedback from folks to make this more interesting, so it's not just me droning on and on. But anyway, my name is Alan Mua, and I am the current chair of the Washington Alliance for Quality Recovery Residences. A couple of you who are online right now live know me and know Justin. Justin is our coordinator of professional development and accreditation process. So Justin works on these kinds of educational events, and also in our accreditation process kind of helps us do a lot of those logistics. So and for today, as always in these webinars, he's acting as our tech guy, kind of back end, making sure that everything works. So thanks, Justin, for doing this. If you're watching this on a recorded, the recorded version, welcome to you as well. Hopefully this is helpful, and we'll do this in a way that is somewhat timeless. That's the goal. But as we move ahead, we are in the middle of a series of webinars. You can go to our website and see what those look like along the way. So back to the topic at hand, we are, here's what we're going to do today. We're going to spend a little time. I want to start off just by getting some input on the question from you, if you're willing. And we don't have to take a lot of time on that, but just interested to hear how other people would say what makes a recovery residence. I have some thoughts based in a couple of sources that I've been spending some time in, but would love to hear from you. And then we're going to look at the definitions. We're going to look at SAMHSA's definition, which we every once in a while remind everybody of, and that kind of narrows things down a bit. But then we're going to spend some time, the bulk of our time today, looking through, just sort of skimming the standards from the National Alliance for Recovery Residences, or NAR, which Walker has adopted. And those standards say some things. We're not going through every standard by any stretch, but what I did is I just pulled out some that I felt like spoke to, you know, what makes a recovery residence a recovery residence. So that help us answer this question. And so that's really where we're headed today. And then at the end, of course, as always, we want to leave time if anyone has comments or questions, anything you want to add and throw in, we're always open to that. So here's the question I want to ask you is what are the essential functions of a recovery residence? What is that? What's when we talk about that, we want to know what comes to mind for you. What separates a recovery residence from another kind of group home or just a group of people living together who kind of share the ideas around sobriety? Maybe there's a house rule that says that, okay, we're going to be sober. Are there things that we espouse as a group that are maybe beyond just a real minimal level of commitment to living in abstinence or sobriety? So I want to open it up and see if those who are participating have thoughts about that. Just throw out in your own words kind of what you think makes what makes it quack like a duck, walk like a duck.
And any of the participants, they could either raise their hand, they could make a quick little comment in the chat box. I can allow them to talk if they just give me the heads up that they want to put in their input there.
Great. So anyone have thoughts just off the top of your head? What are we talking about when we're talking about a recovery residence? Some big ideas. I'm pretty good at silence, but we won't go forever here. So if you have anything, throw it in. Otherwise, we'll dive into our thoughts, and then maybe at the end you can add something. But all right, going once. All right, I'm going to keep plugging along then, and let's read this is just the SAMHSA definition, which we visit every once in a while. But Justin, are you up for just reading that from the screen for us, just to make things a little more interesting?
I can. I'll have to move a few of the little tabs I have open on this, but SAMHSA's definition of recovery residence. Recovery houses are safe, healthy, family-like, substance-free living environments that support individuals in recovery from addiction. While recovery residents vary widely in structure, all are centered on peer support and a connection to services that promote long-term recovery. Recovery housing benefits individuals in recovery by reinforcing a substance-free lifestyle and providing direct connections to other peers in recovery, mutual support groups, and recovery support services. Substance-free does not prohibit prescription medications taken as directed by a licensed prescriber, such as specifically approved by the FDA for treatment of opioid use disorders, as well as other medications with FDA-approved indications for the treatment of co-occurring disorders.
Great, thank you. So a couple things that I want to just point out that I think as we get into the standard, we'll talk about a little bit. But first of all, I think one thing that is worth saying is that this sort of peer support kind of component, that what differentiates a recovery residence from, say, a real treatment environment is that it really is based on what we use, language we use a lot around this is the social model. So the social model as opposed to the clinical model. So a clinical model says the people who are running the thing know what's best for everybody, and they're going to prescribe to the residents or the clients or the patients in the facility what their recovery is going to look like during their time there. So there might be some clinical environments that have some peer kinds of components to them, but in the main, a clinical environment is really is run like a hospital or a clinic, and is very much prescribed. A social model, even one with a lot of structure to it, is still really relies on the peer interaction between residents, among residents, to, if you think about kind of what's the secret sauce in recovery residents, it's that we're doing this together. And so so one person, if one person were living in a house just doing recovery, that would not be a recovery residence, because the social model isn't at play. They're not interacting with people. They're not learning how to get along and do conflict and and learning how to support each other and be, and as importantly, be supported in the recovery process. None of that stuff happens with one person. So the whole deal is that it's social. That doesn't mean, again, that there's no structure. It doesn't mean that there aren't people involved who are, say, in a structured program, teaching life skills. There might be a curfew. There might be what I like affectionately call lane bumpers, right? So when you're bowling and you're a kid, you've got these sort of bumpers on the sides of the lane that kind of keep the ball in the middle, but the ball can go anywhere in the middle, but it's going to hit a pin or two at least, no matter how it ends up. And so more structured programs have higher lane bumpers, and that's okay. But there's still this component where there is freedom and encouragement for residents to be supporting each other, and for that dynamic to be really transformative in the lives of the residents. So that's the secret sauce. The other thing I see in here is just intentionality about recovery. So it's not a kind of environment that, it speaks very specifically that it's tailored for people who are in recovery from substance use disorders. Again, that doesn't mean that they can't be in recovery from other things. Many of our residents, as we know, are in recovery from co-occurring disorders. So there's mental health that's going on, or mental unhealth that's in the background that we're working toward, just healing in that area as well. And often, there's things around post-traumatic stress that come about as a result of all kinds of trauma, but specifically there are a growing number of residences in our state that are really trying to focus on working with veterans, for instance. And that particular group may have some really specific kinds of needs that are about recovery, but it's maybe a different flavor of recovery. And so for someone who's running a home like that, for them to discern, are we a recovery residence in the way that Walker or NAR would define recovery residences, or even the way SAMHSA does, is a really important question to ask. And so if it's recovery that's defined much more broadly than substance use disorder, it may or may not fit. So as we look at the standards about kind of what it looks like on the ground, that may give us some clue about that. So these aren't necessarily yes or no kinds of questions, which is the other thing I want to say before we dive into the next slides. But that we may have a provider who says, okay, here's the kind of house that we have. Here's what I would call our target audience, the group of people who we are working with and who live with us. And we may decide together that, that fits, because there really is this sort of central component of working through addictive behavior and addictions to substances. And so it fits. In other cases, they might say, boy, we're not going to turn somebody down who doesn't have a substance use disorder, but they need support of a community. And we're, of course, extremely supportive of that. But we may say, yeah, that probably not. If they have a different kind of set of standards for those folks, that might not fit the paradigm that we're talking about. So all of that said, that's SAMHSA's definition. I want to move on to another one, and I'm going to be as helpful as I can here. I'm going to read through things, but that it will help me if I can turn off my camera to do that, so you don't have to look at that in the way as we're flipping through the screens here. So so this is the NAR standard, and if you haven't spent any time looking through this, it's a great resource to give you a really clear idea, especially if you're looking at the accreditation process. So we haven't designed today's topic to be the accreditation process, but that's obviously based on the standard. And so the standard has some quite a bit of language in it that would inform this question of what's a recovery residence. So that's what we're going to use as a guide. But in that process, know that this is a great document if you're actually moving toward that accreditation. So I am going to move us along here, I hope. Let's see. There we go. All right. So these major headings here at the top are part of kind of larger topical headings that are in the standard. I'm not going to pull up the standard itself. It's a long document. It's on our website. So if you go to walker.org, and on the top right-hand corner, there is a tab called Resources, and that'll take you down to an area of the page where you can download the quality standards as well as the Code of Ethics, both of which have a lot to say about how we run a recovery residence. But I'm going to give you a real high-level kind of look as it relates to our question today, which is what makes a recovery residence. So first of all, it's important, and it's in the standard, that there's a written mission. So just something in writing that defines here's who lives here. And here's what we want to be about in terms of here's how we might be unique as compared to maybe another kind of recovery residence or another kind of housing. So obviously a lot of these mission statements might look the same, but a mission statement is just a good place to start. If you're starting an organization or you're starting a house, who are you there for, and what do you want to do that's special, that is that sort of separates you from maybe what something is happening down the street. And again, there's nothing wrong with those statements matching or being pretty close together, because we need more of everything. So the next one is attainment of appropriate legal entity status. And all we mean here is just that depending on where your house is located, how you're operating it, and so on, you might very well need a local business license. You might need to be recognized as a state. If you're a nonprofit, you definitely need state recognition, and even federal recognition is important. If you're raising funds, you need to register as a charity in the state of Washington. So there's just some things to think about there related to legal status. So it also, having a legal status protects you as an individual from some things that could happen related to liability that would be really not helpful for you. So you could get caught up in something that really you wouldn't, that the legal status would protect you from. So you don't want to do this on your own. You want to be you want to have some sort of an organization that's formed depending on your structure and how you want to do it. Certainly that could be for-profit or nonprofit. We tend to think there's some real advantages to being a nonprofit organization or to having a nonprofit status, most of which have to do with fundraising, because there are grants that you can qualify for as a nonprofit that you wouldn't otherwise. But if you've got one house and all you're trying to do is help people, and you're going to do that primarily you're going to fund that primarily through rent or lease agreements, then you may not need to do that. But the legal status could be just an LLC or a sole proprietorship or something. So we're not giving legal advice, but we do look to see how are you organized. So ethical marketing. So this is just something that if you are putting yourself out there and trying to lure residents to live in your house, you're obviously going to be saying something about what you have to offer. And if you are a recovery residence that's operating with integrity, then you are ethical about how you're doing that. Specifically, you're not making promises that you can't keep. You're not, our preference is that you don't say that you are the best recovery residence in the state or in the region or whatever. I think for one thing, it's really hard to measure how that would be true. And second, you're part of a community of a whole lot of other folks who are trying to do this work and doing it well. And so it'd be great to just be honest about who you are and what you have to offer, and then let other people decide whether you're the best or not. Anyway, ability to account for resident payment history. This is a real specific kind of thing. But if it's just somebody renting a house to a bunch of people, they may not think about this, but it's really important that the folks that we work with are so often by definition vulnerable, and they may or may not keep track of things very well themselves. And so for us to be able to have some sort of what I would call an accounting system or that's in place. You've got something beyond just scraps of paper somewhere that talk about, that keep really good track of what's been paid, what's still owed, if you've made any kind of special arrangements, those kinds of things. That should really be done systematically. So that's kind of in the weeds, but really important to say. That was what would differentiate a recovery residence from some other kinds of operation. So uphold residents' rights. So again, we have an eye toward the resident being the reason why we're doing this. There's nothing that says that that an operator can't make a living or can't make money on recovery residences. My sense is, if you were really looking for a great money maker, this probably isn't going to be the field that you're in. But at the center of all of it is that we are treating people well, and we're treating them ethically. So, so the first thing is, this is a little subtitle, a little subsection, but documentation of a process that requires a written agreement prior to a community, prior to committing to terms that include the following. So, in other words, before somebody comes and lives with us in one of our houses, they know what they're signing up for, and they know what they're entitled to. So again, this might be different than what another landlord would do. So again, if you're just running a boarding house somewhere, there might not be much that's said about these things. There might be some things that are implied. And if you're working with somebody who is healthy and knows to ask good questions about about these kinds of things, you wouldn't necessarily go to the trouble of articulating this very clearly. We're saying, because of the nature of the folks that we work with, and because we want to be really above board on all of this, there's some things that they need to know upfront before they commit. And so that could be in some sort of document, like a resident guideline, could be in your lease document, but a person should be able to have access to that before signing anything. And so folks are often under pressure to find a place, and so this can get in the way of that, where our inclination is to say, well, come on and we'll talk about this stuff when you get here. But honestly, this really helps us to put it out up front, helps us and helps them feel like they're working within guidelines that they can trust. So just real briefly, resident rights. This could be a really brief list, but and there's some models of that on in our documents. That we have a little document library that we share. These are pretty basic kinds of things. Financial obligations and agreements. So, really basically, what's rent? What's the refund policy? How long are they signing up for? If they leave in the middle of a month, what happens? Those kinds of things. Services provided. What can they expect to get for that rent? Aside from just a place to live, are they getting any other kinds of support? So the more structured the program is, and so on, the more components it has, just to let them know what that's about. Recovery goals. So your organization may have a real specific idea of the kind of things that you offer and the things that you're hoping residents will experience while they're with you, to lay that out ahead of time, so that some folks just feel like, hey, all I really need is a place to stay, and it's great if it's sober because I have a problem. And so so they may get surprised if they show up and all of a sudden you have a program for them to participate in. It would be just helpful for them to know that up front. Same thing on relapse policies or return to use policies. So when somebody is coming to you with this specific disorder, there is a chance that they will return to use. And if so, what does that mean for you, and what would that mean for them? And to be really explicit about that up front is important. Policies regarding removal of personal property. So this is a big one. If I do leave, what are you going to do with my stuff? And how long do I have before I go get my stuff? So this probably isn't something, especially these last two, that a regular landlord would spend a lot of time on, because there's sort of legal parameters around all of that, and it would just sort of default to what the state or the local jurisdiction tells you you've got to do with stuff. But again, we're working with folks that that might be a little bit more transient in nature, or they may, so just being really upfront about what they can expect is ethical and right. So the next kind of major heading is to create a culture of empowerment where residents engage in governance and leadership. So this can mean a lot of different things. So in working with providers during the accreditation process, they'll say, well, I have some structure to the program here, and I want to be sure that that we get to keep the flavor of what we're doing. And so this isn't saying that residents run the whole show. If you are using an Oxford House model, of course, it's a lot more like that. Oxford House doesn't have a lot of structure, but the structure they do have is largely really run on the ground by the residents. As you get into what we call a higher level of care, where there are more and more structural components to a program, those kinds of everyday decisions may not be up to residents. So who gets into the house, for instance, is something that that residents don't decide in many programs that are more structured, or when a resident is going to be asked to leave the house. At Oxford House, they vote on that in a house meeting. That is often not the case in a higher level of care kind of environment where there are other components that are being considered. So, but how are residents involved in governance? Can they be involved in things like setting chores and even what happens when someone doesn't do their chore? Could they come up with some community understanding of what that would look like? So we encourage houses to sit down and have a question, to answer some questions around how do we intend to treat each other? What are some things that we, the residents, want to see in place? What would make this place better for us to live in? And just brainstorm that on a big piece of butcher paper, or however you want to do it. And then that list of commitments or community standards gets printed up and hung up somewhere. And maybe it gets revisited every so often, but that the residents are involved in deciding at some level what their place is like. Some places have resident councils that even have disciplinary kinds of functions, or at least are helping make environmental kind of decisions. So the next thing is just that residents are involved in the developmental approach to recovery. In other words, they're having something to say about there's some phases to a program maybe, or there's something that's happening in their on the ground where there's acknowledgement that residents are moving through a process, that recovery itself has some phases to it and some process that goes on. And so recognizing those things is one way of acknowledging that residents are in many ways kind of in charge of their own destiny. They're moving forward in a direction. Not everybody's the same, not everybody's in the same place. So being able to acknowledge that. And then many homes have leadership roles. And so house assistants, house managers, there's all kinds of names for those things. Some are paid, some are unpaid, some get reduced rent, all of that. But this is a part of residents having some say in governance, is that if there are leadership positions that are kind of peer leaders, just being really clear and upfront about what those are and what people get out of doing those things and what's expected of them. So we're going to talk a little bit more about those folks. We're going to refer to them as staff here in a couple of slides. And here we are. So develop staff ability to apply the social model of recovery. So we said that the social model, as opposed to the clinical model, is all about peers supporting peers and people who have been there, helping people who aren't maybe as far along the way, or people mutually supporting each other, all of that. So as we define staff here, we're going to define it really broadly. So just if you have somebody in the house that is a leader of some kind, a peer leader, someone who you call a house assistant or a house manager, even if they are a part of the program, participating in the program, all of that, that they have some actual leadership responsibility. they need to have a clear job description. So and this just helps them know what the expectation is. It helps you be able to hold somebody accountable to something. And by the way, you know, in relationship to pay, we found that, and I hear this a lot, that that pay can look like a lot of different things. Even having a title and some responsibility is payment for somebody. It really means something. It has some weight to it, and it's important. But so it's not always talking about money when we talk about pay. Um, Having a single room might be pay. It might feel like compensation to somebody, or maybe getting some sort of break on the rent or something. But there are a lot of ways that people can be compensated. Um, I happen to think that one of the major ways that people get compensated is they get to spend extra time with the director of the house and or the owner or the operator. And learn some things about how to do this job, which oftentimes can be really difficult, but it can be very formative and just an excellent opportunity. So we pay people in these roles in all kinds of ways. But so here we're just calling them staff generically. But we're looking for staff who model and teach recovery behavior. So if this is a peer position, you want to put somebody in that role who is a role model and who really is walking their talk. And so, and as you all know who are doing this, you know that residents will be very attuned to whether or not that's happening. And some of that is even unfair, I would say, but it's true. They pay attention. So who we have in that role is probably one of the most important decisions that we'll make if you have a house leadership structure. The people who are in that leadership have everything to do with the success of the house. Staff are supported in maintaining good boundaries and self-care. So if I have someone who I've given a job description to and I've said, okay, this is your set of responsibilities, I'm also helping them in the way of support with boundaries, because that's almost always going to be something that it's worth paying attention to for somebody who's new to a role like this. And then how are they doing self-care? So so many times codependency and other kinds of dysfunction can get in the way of these folks doing good work, just like it can for all of us. And so helping them establish those things and care for themselves well is a level of support that if you have enough structure where you've got someone in place that's doing this, you've got to be able to support that person. Staff are trained according to the level of care that's offered in the residence. So as we've alluded to, there are a lot of different flavors of a recovery residence. Some of them have a lot more components around life skill development and so on. And for those that have a lot more components, and if you're asking your staff to teach or to model or to coach, then obviously it's incumbent on us to show that they or to prepare them for that role. So so that's some about the sort of staff component. And no matter how you define staff, what defines a recovery residence is that the people who we give responsibility to are supported and are able to do that job. Next, in general, sort of back to the big idea that we should provide a home-like environment. So what separates recovery residents from inpatient treatment is that it shouldn't look or feel like a hospital. And by the way, you can take a house and turn it into a hospital if you try hard enough. So I've seen some places that are kind of borderline. And let me just give you some examples. Cameras everywhere. Obviously there needs to be some extra signage often in places, but you have a lot of choices about what that signage looks like and how big it is and how pronounced it is. And things that make a home is art on the walls and furniture that's not institutional. It can be solid and sturdy without feeling like it's a hospital waiting room. So there are just a lot of decisions that we make day in and day out about what a place looks like that determine whether it's a home. So recovery residences are first and foremost residences. They're homes. So the residence is comfortable, inviting, and meets residents' needs. So I think I just covered that pretty well. So meets the needs, meaning, these are people who live there. We have to remind ourselves, these are people's homes. So I'll tell on myself a little bit. I thought, boy, we could save a lot of money on paper towels and soap if we got these sort of industrial dispensers. And so we did that in a couple of our homes. And but in one of them, the residents said, "Boy, do we really need that? Could we do something that looks a little bit nicer than that? That it doesn't look like we're in a public restroom." Um, and so they asserted themselves a bit, and we decided, yeah, we're not going to do soap dispensers in this particular home. They didn't want that. They didn't feel like it felt homey enough. So we compromised a bit and came up with something that the residents felt like would better meet their needs and would help them feel like this is their house and not a hospital or an institution. And so we learned. A couple other things here, 50 square feet. This is, again, getting a little bit into the weeds, but important. So a recovery residence is going to provide enough space for people to live and feel like they've got some personal space. 50 square feet per bed per sleeping room. So and by the way, if you do that math, that's 5 feet by 10 feet. That is not a lot of space. So I'll just be honest and say, if you're right at this 50 square foot per resident mark, I would sure hope that there would be other space in the house that's bigger, where residents can go to be and find some space to do whatever it is that they want to be doing. So this is a pretty minimal number if you think about it, but it certainly is. We have to have a standard somewhere, and that's what the standard says. So again, another specific one: 1 sink, 1 shower, and 1 toilet per, oh, sorry. That should say per 6 residents. So that's a mistake. I guess I got in a hurry when I was writing this up. So 6 residents. So if you have 12 residents, that's when that would double. Actually, if you have 7 residents, that's when that would double. So you need to have enough restroom facility to do all that. So living space is conducive to building community. So there should be a space for everyone in the house to sit down together. And if there's not a living space that's that big, how can you do that? There are, is there a dining room table? Can everyone sit and eat together? Or is there some expectation that people are just going to be eating on their own on the couches? We would say that it makes some sense that there be some place to gather and eat together, because eating is such a central part of living. So the environment is healthy and safe. This, we could say a lot about this, but essentially in our accreditation process, of course, we're going to look to see that the electric outlets are covered, and that there are a couple fire extinguishers, and that there aren't exposed wires, and that the paint isn't chipping off the walls, and all those kinds of things. So it should feel clean, and it should feel healthy, and it should feel safe. And then it's one thing that would happen in this kind of setting that might not happen in a single family setting is that we need to pay attention to what potential emergencies might look like. So fires, return to use, what does that look like? That can feel like an emergency in a home. So what are the protocols that everyone should just know about? And of course, overdose. So we require in all of our homes that there are naloxone kits. And if you're operating a residence that doesn't have naloxone around, that's the overdose reversal medication. Please contact us. We have a lot of connections, and we can provide those. And that's just a basic first aid component. So again, that's not something that maybe a single family residence would have, or another kind of residence would have, but certainly given the risk factors in the populations that might be living with us, we would definitely want to be sure that we have those available. Facilities, I'm sorry, we're going to facilitate active recovery. So this is another thing that probably is different from maybe a broader kind of a mission, or from a single family residence, or from the apartment building down the street, is that we're going to promote meaningful recovery activities. So that could be recovery meetings in the community. It could just be healthy, sober activities, which for many people, that's kind of new territory. So if the definition of fun for me during my adult years has involved a substance that I've been addicted to, I've got to learn a whole new way of doing things. And my recovery residence may be the first chance that I get to go learn about what I could go do for fun that doesn't involve being intoxicated. So we as providers have some responsibility to help in that regard. Second, is that promote access to community supports. So we shouldn't assume that our residents know what's out there in our communities to support them. If you think about the people who live with us, they have so often come to us with sort of a vacuum of support. I was thinking this morning as I was thinking about these things, I know personally as good friends 4 attorneys. They all have different specialties. I just happen to over time have developed those relationships. So pretty much if I have something that's legal that I need to ask of somebody, I don't have to pay somebody, at least at first, to deal with that. I can go call my friend and get some help in that area. I know 3 people who work on cars. And so one of those 3 people can at least give me advice on where I should go to get my car need taken care of. So often our residents come to us without that. So how are we providing some scaffolding for them to connect them, to help them build those networks for themselves so that maybe when they leave our residence, they have a much broader network of support in all kinds of practical areas that they didn't come in with. So we have a role in helping them do that. Cultivate the residents' sense of belonging and responsibility for community. And I don't think I need to tell this group this, but addiction is a disease of isolation. And so again, so many folks come to us with this sort of vacuum or this sense that that community is scary or at worst, or dangerous. And so there's this propensity to isolate in so many people. And especially these days with the pandemic raging, there's this, we tell people to connect, and we say things like the opposite of addiction is connection. And yet we know that for so many of our folks, that's a really scary proposition. So how do we help people figure out that community is good and can be an answer to some, or can provide solutions to some of the struggles that they're walking through, as opposed to being something to be afraid of. So our residences should be places where that is celebrated. A lot of residences that I know of have policies that about no TVs in bedrooms, right? Or no computer use in bedrooms. They require that residents do that out in common areas, so that when they're watching TV, someone else can join them. Makes a lot of sense if you're trying to help people to sort of kind of break out of their cocoons, literal and figurative. So something to think about that, again, separates us from other places. Good neighbor policy. I just put something in here. There's a whole section on it in the standards because it's a big deal, but for our residences in particular. But if we want our residences to continue to operate and to be welcomed in neighborhoods, we've got to be good neighbors. So we want to be responsible to neighbor concerns. So if something does come up where a neighbor complains or has something to say, especially immediate neighbors, we want them to know what to be able to do about that, and who do they talk to, and how do they do that. So how do we make ourselves known in the neighborhood in a healthy way? And then if people do have concerns, they know who to call, and they're going to get a quick response, and there's going to be something that happens in response to their complaint. If it's a reasonable complaint or concern, that gets dealt with right away. And then secondly, of course, we've got to create policies in our house that again, you wouldn't have necessarily in a single family residence, or that another landlord wouldn't necessarily have to spell out. But around noise, loud music, smoking, even profanity, and parking. Those are kind of the big ones. So there are other things you could probably add to that list, but we want to be such good neighbors because we want to be in a neighborhood. Our residents want to be good neighbors, and but some of this stuff doesn't come intuitively to folks. So to have some guidelines in place in our residences that help them help them live that out is really helpful. So I want to just open it up. I've been talking a lot, again, most of this through the standards. I want to just open it up and see if anybody has anything to add to that in terms of your own thinking about what makes a recovery residence, or just anything that any of that has triggered for you in the way of questions. Would love to process those with you at this point. As I like to say, this is the interactive portion of the program. So anybody have anything you want to contribute?
Miranda in the chat says, thank you so much for all the amazing info. I have another meeting, but wanted to be sure. And thank you both. Have a great day.
Great, thank you. And please fill out, we're going to send an evaluation request to you in the next day or so. Would love it if whoever's attending is able to send us feedback on the program. We always use that to make it better. So thanks. Anything else from anybody? All right. Okay, so obviously if you're watching the recorded version
Let's see,
of this,
Carmen actually has her hand raised, so I'm going to allow her to talk, if that's okay. Go for it.
Great, Carmen.
Or Karen, sorry.
Carmen.
Yes.
Got it.
So she is allowed to talk if she...
Hey, thank you. I was going to say, Alan, just when I think that I've been able to come up with solutions for most things, you come up with some new things, and I'm like, well, we haven't really thought of that yet. And I really liked the courtesy rules. That was good for me, for us to actually have, because we have like quiet hours, but I hadn't thought about exactly how to use those courtesy rules and apply it more directly to the neighborhood. So thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's pretty important. And you don't have to make, I think that in all of this, the propensity is to just make more rules. And so I really want to warn you not to overdo that. But I think in this particular area, we've got to have good neighborhood relations. And I tell our residents, hey, you might be graduating from here in 6 months, but we continue to live in this neighborhood. And so you're helping create the climate for our future here. And so we really need you to cooperate with us on these things. So, and generally they get it. And most residents want to be good neighbors and they don't want to offend anybody. So it's, yeah.
Thank you.
You bet. Thanks for bringing that up. All right. Well, with that, I will ask again, anyone participating, if you would like to send us feedback, we'll send we're going to send out a link to the evaluation, and it's just part of the process for us. Helps us know how people are responding and how useful this information is. If you're watching the recorded version and you want to give us feedback, feel free to do that at any time, and would love, we'll probably do some version of this presentation in future years. And so any input that you have to make it better would be greatly appreciated. Justin, thank you for your time today, and we really appreciate everyone who attended, and hope to continue these conversations soon. Keep an eye on the website. We'll send out an announcement usually at the beginning of every month about what our topic is going to be. I think we're skipping December. Is that right, Justin? And we're going to jump back in January.
Yeah, I believe that was the plan.
So, and then we have some other programs coming up later in the year or the start of next calendar year that are on real specific topics, and they're going to be a little bit different format. So looking forward to those as well. So thanks everybody, and hope to see you soon in some context or other, and we'll do this again.